Hey everyone, comment where you're watching from today. Sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin in the most ordinary places. This is the story of how a simple donation to a homeless shelter in Chicago led to an incredible discovery that would change lives forever. Holden Briggs had been running the Riverside Haven homeless shelter for 15 years, but nothing could have prepared him for what he would find on that cold February morning. The shelter, tucked away in a quiet corner of Chicago's west side, had always been a place where hope somehow managed to survive even in the darkest times. That morning started like any other. Holden was sorting through the latest batch of clothing donations with Freya Lowell, a dedicated volunteer who had been helping at the shelter for the past 3 years. The winter had been particularly harsh, and the shelter's resources were stretched thin trying to accommodate the increasing number of people seeking refuge from the bitter cold. Among the usual assortment of coats, sweaters, and worn shoes was a garbage bag that felt different somehow. Freya noticed it first. The way the fabric inside seemed heavier, more substantial than the typical donations they received. As she opened the bag, her eyes widened, and she called Holden over. Inside was a Chicago Bulls jersey, but not just any jersey. It was number 33, Scottie Pippen's number, and something about it looked different from the replicas they occasionally received. The stitching, the material, the way the numbers were sewn on, it all spoke of authenticity that made both their hearts race a little faster. But what caught their attention even more was the man who had dropped off the bag. Rowan Blackwell had been coming to the shelter for about 6 months now. A former high school basketball coach who had lost everything to addiction, Rowan kept to himself mostly, speaking little about his past. Yet there was always something dignified about the way he carried himself, even in his current circumstances. That morning, before leaving the bag, Rowan had seemed different. His eyes held a clarity that Holden hadn't seen before, and his hands had trembled slightly as he handed over the donation. "Someone needs this more than I do," he had said quietly before disappearing back into the cold morning air. As Holden and Freya examined the jersey more closely, they discovered something that made their discovery even more extraordinary: a signature, not just Scottie Pippen's familiar autograph, but a personal message. "To Coach Blackwell, thank you for showing me what it means to be a leader. Scottie Pippen, 1983". The signature looked authentic, and suddenly the pieces started falling into place. Rowan Blackwell, the quiet, homeless man who spent his nights in their shelter, had once been someone who had touched the life of one of basketball's greatest players. The story began to unfold as Holden reached out to his network of contacts. Quinn Avery, a local sports memorabilia expert, confirmed what they had suspected. This was indeed an authentic jersey, one that had been given to Rowan Blackwell when he was coaching high school basketball in Hamburg, Arkansas, where a young Scottie Pippen was just beginning to discover his potential. But the real story wasn't about the jersey's value or even its authenticity. It was about the man who had held onto it through years of struggles, carrying it as a reminder of who he once was, only to give it up now when he felt others needed help more than he needed memories. Maisie James, one of the shelter's regular volunteers, remembered how Rowan would sometimes watch the younger residents playing basketball in the shelter's small courtyard. He never joined in, but his eyes would follow the game with an intensity that spoke of deep understanding and lost passion. As word of the jersey's discovery spread through the shelter, more pieces of Rowan's story emerged. Camden Hollis, another resident who had been there longer than most, recalled late-night conversations where Rowan had mentioned coaching a kid who made it big. No one had thought much of it at the time. Everyone at the shelter had a story, and many seemed too incredible to be true. But this story was different. This story had proof. And as Holden and his team began to dig deeper, they discovered that Rowan Blackwell's influence on Scottie Pippen's early career had been more significant than anyone had realized. Through old newspaper clippings and yearbook photos provided by Delilah Green, the shelter's administrative assistant who had become invested in uncovering the truth, they learned that Rowan had been more than just a coach. He had been a mentor, a guide who saw potential in a tall, awkward kid who hadn't even made his high school's varsity team as a freshman. The jersey's discovery sparked something in the shelter community. Isaiah Brooks, a young resident who had been struggling with his own demons, was particularly moved by the revelation. If Coach Blackwell could help shape someone like Scottie Pippen, he said during a group session, Imagine what he could still offer the world. The impact of the jersey's discovery rippled through the shelter in unexpected ways. Residents began asking Rowan for basketball advice, and slowly, the former coach began to emerge from his shell. His eyes, once distant and guarded, began to show sparks of their former fire. Kendall Rivers, a social worker who had been trying to connect with Rowan for months, noticed the change immediately. It was like finding that jersey reminded everyone, including Rowan himself, that our circumstances don't define who we are, she observed. Sometimes we need to be reminded of our impact on the world. But the story was far from over. As news of the jersey's discovery began to spread beyond the shelter's walls, it caught the attention of local media. Celeste Hayes, a reporter from the Chicago Tribune, reached out to the shelter, interested in not just the jersey story, but in the man who had kept it safe all these years only to donate it when he felt others needed help more than he needed memories. The shelter's residents and staff rallied around Rowan, protecting him from unwanted attention while encouraging him to share his story on his own terms. Elodie Hart, the shelter's counselor, worked with him daily, helping him process the sudden interest in his past and the emotions it stirred up. As February turned to March, the jersey remained safely stored in Holden's office, but its presence had already catalyzed change. Rowan began leading morning basketball drills in the shelter's courtyard, teaching young residents not just about basketball, but about discipline, teamwork, and believing in themselves. Phoebe Clark, a teenage resident who had been struggling with depression, found purpose in these morning sessions. "Coach Blackwell doesn't just teach us about basketball," she said. "He teaches us about life, about second chances, and about never giving up on ourselves." The jersey had become more than just a piece of sports memorabilia. It had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that everyone's story matters, and that even in our darkest moments, we carry within us the potential to impact others' lives in meaningful ways. Have you ever discovered something that reminded you of the power of human connection? Of how a single act of kindness or mentorship can ripple through time, touching lives in ways we might never expect? Share your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the most valuable things we possess aren't the items themselves, but the memories and lessons they carry. As word of the jersey's discovery spread through Chicago's basketball community, the story began to take unexpected turns. Lachlan Drew, a local basketball historian, arrived at Riverside Haven Shelter one morning with a stack of yellowed newspapers and photographs that would help piece together the remarkable journey of both the jersey and the man who had kept it safe for so long. The articles painted a picture of a different Rowan Blackwell, a passionate young coach in Hamburg, Arkansas, who had seen something special in a gangly teenager named Scottie Pippen. In those early days, before the championships and the Olympic gold medals, before the NBA fame and fortune, Scottie was just another kid with a dream, and Rowan was the coach who believed in him first. Marcus Ellery, one of the shelter's regular donors and a former high school basketball player himself, spent hours talking with Rowan, gradually drawing out stories that had remained untold for decades. The morning sessions in the shelter's courtyard had become more than just basketball practice. They had become a bridge between past and present, between loss and redemption. "I never told anyone about the jersey," Rowan explained during one of these conversations, his voice quiet but steady. "It wasn't about the signature or what it might be worth. It was about remembering that sometimes the greatest victories happen off the court." Nora Lennox, the shelter's kitchen manager, noticed how Rowan's posture had changed since the jersey's discovery. He stood straighter now, spoke with more confidence. The man who had spent months shuffling through the shelter's halls in silence was gradually being replaced by someone who carried himself with the quiet authority of a mentor. The transformation wasn't lost on the shelter's younger residents. Sterling West, a 19-year-old who had been living on the streets before finding his way to Riverside Haven, became one of Rowan's most dedicated students. "Coach doesn't just teach us plays," Sterling observed. "He teaches us about character, about picking ourselves up when life knocks us down." As more details of Rowan's past emerged, Uriel Clayton, a sports journalist who had covered the Bulls during their championship years, made a surprising discovery. He found footage of a young Scottie Pippen mentioning Rowan in an interview after his first NBA game. "Coach Blackwell taught me that basketball isn't just about talent," Scottie had said. It's about heart, about seeing the whole court, about making everyone around you better. The impact of these revelations rippled through the shelter community. Georgia Wynn, a social worker specializing in addiction recovery, saw how Rowan's story was affecting other residents. People who had given up on their own second chances are starting to see things differently, she noted. They're beginning to understand that our past achievements and our present circumstances don't define our future potential. Harper Ellis, one of the teenagers who attended Rowan's morning sessions, discovered an old playbook in the coach's few possessions. The pages were worn, the margins filled with notes about leadership, character, and perseverance. These aren't just basketball plays, Harper realized. They're life lessons disguised as sports strategy. The shelter's atmosphere had changed noticeably since the jersey's discovery. Isla Montgomery, who ran art therapy sessions for residents, incorporated basketball themes into her workshops, encouraging participants to explore their own journeys through visual storytelling. The results were powerful, paintings and drawings that spoke of loss, hope, and the long road to redemption. But it was during a quiet evening session that the story took another unexpected turn. Josie Vance, a retired high school counselor who volunteered at the shelter, recognized a name in one of the old newspaper clippings: Felix Monroe, a former student of Rowan's who had gone on to become a successful college basketball coach himself. When contacted, Felix's response was immediate and emotional. Coach Blackwell didn't just teach basketball, he explained in a phone call that left the shelter staff in tears. He saved lives. He gave kids like me a reason to believe in ourselves when nobody else did. The fact that he's still teaching, still mentoring, even in these circumstances, that's who he always was. The story caught the attention of Kaya Whitmore, a documentary filmmaker who specialized in sports stories with social impact. She approached the shelter with a proposal to document Rowan's journey, not as a story of loss, but as a testament to the enduring power of mentorship and the human spirit. Lillian Hale, the shelter's board president, saw the potential impact of sharing Rowan's story. This isn't just about one man's connection to a famous athlete, she explained. It's about how we value people, how we measure success, and how we support those who have lost their way. As winter deepened, the morning basketball sessions continued, now attended by an increasing number of shelter residents and even some from the surrounding community. Odessa Blake, a former professional basketball player who had heard about Rowan's story, began volunteering her time, working alongside him to create a more structured program for the shelter's youth. The jersey remained secured in Holden's office, but its presence had catalyzed something powerful. Penelope Shaw, a counselor specializing in trauma recovery, observed how the residents who participated in Rowan's program were showing significant improvements in their emotional well-being and social interactions. Quinn Avery's initial authentication of the jersey led to an unexpected development. Romalie Hayes, a sports memorabilia collector, offered to purchase the jersey for a substantial sum, with all proceeds going to the shelter. But when presented with the offer, Rowan's response surprised everyone. "The jersey isn't mine to sell," he said quietly. "It belongs to the story it tells, about belief, about second chances, about the power of seeing potential in others. Maybe it can do more good here, reminding people that their past achievements and present struggles don't define their future possibilities." Serena Banks, a graduate student researching the impact of sports programs in rehabilitation settings, began documenting the changes at Riverside Haven. Her observations revealed how the combination of physical activity, mentorship, and shared purpose was creating a new kind of healing environment. The shelter's youngest residents were particularly affected by Rowan's presence. Tamsin Clark, a 14-year-old who had arrived at the shelter with her mother, found in basketball a way to process her own trauma. "When Coach talks about the game," she said, "he's really talking about life. About how to face challenges, how to work with others, how to believe in yourself even when things seem impossible." As news of the program's success spread, other shelters began reaching out, interested in implementing similar initiatives. Ursula Merrick, a consultant specializing in nonprofit program development, helped create a framework that could be shared with other facilities, using Rowan's approach as a model. The jersey's discovery had sparked something that went far beyond sports memorabilia or even basketball itself. Valerie Holt, a psychologist who studied resilience in vulnerable populations, noted how the story had created a new narrative about homelessness and human potential. What we're seeing here, she explained, is how a single artifact, a piece of shared history, can remind us of our connections to each other and our capacity for renewal. Have you ever witnessed how a simple object can become a catalyst for transformation? How something from the past can light the way toward a new future? Share your stories of unexpected inspiration in the comments below. Sometimes the most powerful changes begin with a simple reminder of who we once were and who we might still become. As spring approached Chicago, the story of Rowan Blackwell and Scottie Pippen's jersey had begun to transcend the walls of Riverside Haven Shelter. Winnie Drake, a social media coordinator for a local news station, noticed how the story was resonating with people far beyond the basketball community. It wasn't just about sports anymore. It had become a powerful narrative about redemption, second chances, and the enduring impact of mentorship. The morning basketball sessions had evolved into something more structured. Zena Blair, a former college basketball player who now worked in youth development, helped Rowan establish what they called the More Than a Game program. The initiative combined basketball training with life skills workshops, creating a comprehensive approach to personal development. Zinnia Carr, one of the shelter's success stories who had recently secured both housing and employment, credited the program with helping her rediscover her sense of self-worth. When Coach Blackwell talks about basketball strategy, she explained, he's really teaching us about life. About how to read situations, how to adapt, how to find opportunities even when everything seems blocked. The impact of the program caught the attention of Annalise Frost, a researcher studying innovative approaches to homeless rehabilitation. Her preliminary findings showed significant improvements in participants' mental health, social connections, and overall motivation to make positive life changes. Bridget Monroe, a local business owner who had been skeptical about supporting shelter programs, visited one morning session and was immediately struck by what she saw. The courtyard was filled with people of all ages, some playing basketball, others watching and encouraging from the sidelines. But what caught her attention most was the sense of community, of shared purpose. As the program grew, Beckett Monroe, a sports psychologist, began volunteering his time, working alongside Rowan to develop strategies that incorporated mental health support into the basketball training. What we're seeing here, he observed, is how physical activity and mentorship can create a foundation for deeper healing. The jersey itself had taken on an almost mythical quality within the shelter community. Calvin Rhodes, a teenage resident who had been struggling with anger issues, spent hours studying the old photographs and news clippings about Rowan's coaching days. If Coach could help Scottie Pippen become great, he reasoned, maybe he can help us become better too. Dalton Avery, a documentary filmmaker who had been following the story, captured a powerful moment during one of the morning sessions. Rowan was working with a group of younger residents, teaching them about defensive positioning. Basketball defense, he told them, is like life. Sometimes you get knocked down, but what matters is how quickly you get back up and get into position. The program's success attracted the attention of Elias Mercer, a former NBA player who had struggled with his own demons after retiring from professional basketball. He visited the shelter, sharing his story and working with Rowan to expand the program's reach. What's happening here, Elias noted, is bigger than basketball. It's about finding your way back to who you are. Finnegan Hart, a local journalist, spent several weeks documenting the changes at Riverside Haven. His articles captured how the discovery of the jersey had transformed not just Rowan, but the entire shelter community. The basketball court had become a place of healing, where past achievements and present struggles merged into lessons about resilience and hope. The impact extended beyond the shelter's immediate community. Garrett Lowe, a high school basketball coach from the suburbs, began bringing his team to volunteer at the morning sessions. My players think they're here to teach basketball, he explained, but they're learning far more important lessons about life, empathy, and the power of second chances. Holden Briggs, who had first discovered the jersey with Freya, noticed how the shelter's atmosphere had changed. Residents who had previously kept to themselves were now engaging with others, offering encouragement, sharing stories. The basketball court had become more than just a recreational space. It was a place where people rediscovered their worth. One morning, Ira Maddox, a former resident who had successfully transitioned to independent living, returned to the shelter with news that brought tears to everyone's eyes. He had secured funding to renovate the shelter's basketball court, ensuring that Rowan's program could continue growing and evolving. Jasper Trent, a sports equipment manufacturer, heard about the program and arranged for a donation of new basketballs, shoes, and training equipment. But it was his personal note to Rowan that touched everyone most deeply. "Your story reminds us that true coaching isn't about creating champions on the court, it's about helping people become champions in life." The program's success inspired Kendrick Shaw, a local community organizer, to launch similar initiatives at other shelters across Chicago. "What Coach Blackwell has shown us," he explained, "is that sometimes the most powerful tool for transformation is simply believing in someone's potential." Levi Brooks, a substance abuse counselor who worked with several shelter residents, noticed how participation in the basketball program was correlating with increased engagement in recovery efforts. The structure, the sense of community, the physical activity, it all creates a foundation for healing, he observed. The story reached a new level of impact when Maddox Price, a successful business executive who had experienced homelessness in his youth, pledged to create a foundation supporting sports-based rehabilitation programs in shelters nationwide. The initiative, named the Blackwell Project, would use Rowan's approach as a model for combining athletic training with personal development. Nolan Carrick, a professional videographer, began documenting the morning sessions, creating short films that captured the transformation taking place on and off the court. His videos showed residents of all ages working together, supporting each other, finding strength in shared challenges and victories. Owen Thatcher, a mental health professional specializing in trauma recovery, noted how the basketball program was creating opportunities for natural therapeutic interventions. When people are engaged in physical activity, working together toward common goals, it creates openings for healing that might not occur in traditional therapeutic settings, he explained. The impact on the shelter's younger residents was particularly notable. Parker Vance, a 17-year-old who had been in and out of foster care, found in Rowan's program a sense of stability and purpose he had never known. "Coach doesn't just teach us about basketball," he said. "He teaches us about life, about character, about never giving up on ourselves or each other." As spring progressed, the morning sessions began attracting attention from local colleges. Quade Benson, a college basketball scout, visited the shelter and was impressed not just by the level of play, but by the spirit of community and support he witnessed. "What's happening here goes beyond sports," he observed. "It's about human potential and the power of believing in people." Remy Doyle, a former professional athlete who now worked in youth development, helped create a scholarship program for shelter residents who showed promise both on and off the court. "But it's not just about basketball scholarships," he emphasized. "It's about creating opportunities for people to rebuild their lives." The story of Rowan and the jersey had become a catalyst for broader conversations about homelessness, rehabilitation, and the power of community support. Sterling West, who had been documenting the program's impact through photography, captured images that spoke to the universal human experiences of struggle, resilience, and redemption. Have you ever witnessed how a single story can inspire a movement? How one person's journey can create ripples of change that touch countless lives? Share your experiences of transformation and community in the comments below. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't measured in points scored or games won, but in lives changed and hope restored. 1 year after the discovery of Scottie Pippen's jersey at Riverside Haven Shelter, Tobias York stood in the newly renovated basketball court, now named the Blackwell Court, documenting what many considered a miracle of human spirit and determination. The transformation wasn't just in the physical space, it was in the lives that had been changed through one man's unwavering belief in the power of second chances. Uriel Clayton, who had been following the story since its beginning, arrived that morning with news that would bring the journey full circle. Scottie Pippen himself had heard about Rowan's story and the impact his old jersey had made. The NBA legend wanted to visit the shelter, not just to reconnect with his former coach, but to witness firsthand how their shared past had created a foundation for others' futures. Victor Sloan, the shelter's new program director, worked with Walker Jennings, a security consultant, to prepare for what would be a momentous day. The media attention was inevitable, but everyone agreed that the focus should remain on the program's impact rather than its celebrity connection. The morning of Scottie's visit, Xavier Boone, one of the program's earliest success stories, stood beside Rowan, both men watching as residents prepared the court for their special guest. "You taught him about leadership," Xavier said quietly, "and now you're teaching all of us." Zachary Ellis, a local city council member who had initially opposed funding for shelter programs, had become one of the initiative's strongest advocates. "What Coach Blackwell and this program have shown us," he declared, "is that investment in human potential yields returns that can't be measured in dollars and cents." When Scottie Pippen walked into the shelter that morning, Brody Stanton, a young resident who had been skeptical of the program's impact, witnessed something remarkable. The NBA legend didn't carry himself with the aloofness of a celebrity. Instead, his eyes searched the room until they found Rowan, and the emotion in that moment of recognition was palpable. Camden Hollis, who had been documenting the program's progress through interviews with participants, captured the powerful reunion. Rowan stood straighter, years seeming to fall away as he greeted his former student. The two men embraced, and in that moment, the distance between past and present, between success and struggle, seemed to disappear. Dean Whitmore, a sports psychologist studying the program's impact, observed how the reunion affected the shelter's residents. "Seeing Coach Blackwell with Scottie Pippen reinforced something crucial," he noted. "It showed that the connection between mentor and student transcends time and circumstance." Emmett Vaughn, one of the teenagers who had found direction through the basketball program, watched in awe as Scottie joined their morning practice session. The NBA star didn't just observe, he participated, working alongside Rowan, demonstrating the very fundamentals his former coach had taught him decades ago. Felix Monroe, who had traveled from Arkansas for the reunion, brought with him a treasure trove of old photographs and newspaper clippings. Coach Blackwell wasn't just teaching basketball back then, he explained to the gathered residents. He was teaching us how to face life's challenges, how to maintain dignity and purpose even when the odds seemed stacked against us. Grant Holloway, a former professional basketball player who had been volunteering with the program, saw how the day's events were affecting the shelter's residents. "They're not just seeing a famous athlete," he observed. "They're seeing living proof that their current circumstances don't define their future potential." Heath Montgomery, who had been studying the program's rehabilitation success rates, noted how the reunion was having an unexpected effect. Residents who had been hesitant to engage with the program were now approaching Rowan, asking to join the morning sessions. The presence of Scottie Pippen had transformed their perception of what was possible. Isaiah Brooks, a young man who had been living on the streets before finding his way to Riverside Haven, summed up the day's significance. "Seeing Coach with Scottie Pippen, hearing their story, it makes you realize that everyone has a journey. Sometimes you're the student, sometimes you're the teacher, but you never stop growing." Jack Penrose, a documentary filmmaker capturing the reunion, focused his lens on the quiet moments between sessions, Rowan and Scottie sitting on the bleachers, talking about old times, sharing stories of triumph and challenge. Their conversation painted a picture of how mentorship creates bonds that survive all of life's upheavals. Keaton Wells, who had helped establish similar programs in other shelters, saw the reunion as a powerful validation of their approach. "What began with a jersey in a donation bag has grown into a movement," he reflected. "It's about using sports as a vehicle for personal transformation, about creating spaces where people can rediscover their worth." Lachlan Drew, working on a book about the program's impact, interviewed both Rowan and Scottie about their shared history. The NBA star spoke candidly about how his former coach's influence extended far beyond basketball. "Coach Blackwell taught me that true greatness isn't about what you achieve," Scottie said, "it's about how you lift others up along the way." Marcus Ellery, who had been instrumental in expanding the program's reach, watched as Scottie worked with current residents on their basketball skills. "The beauty of this moment," he observed, "is that it's not about basketball anymore. It's about hope, about legacy, about the endless cycle of giving and receiving wisdom." Noah Sinclair, a counselor specializing in addiction recovery, noted how the day's events were affecting even the shelter's most withdrawn residents. Seeing Coach Blackwell reunited with Scottie Pippen shows them that their own stories aren't over yet, he explained. That even in our darkest moments, we carry within us the potential for renewal. As the day drew to a close, Orion West, who had been documenting the program's evolution, captured a moment that seemed to encapsulate the entire journey. Rowan and Scottie stood together on the court, surrounded by shelter residents, each holding one end of the jersey that had started it all. The photograph would later become a symbol of the program's mission, a reminder that every person's story contains both chapters of struggle and triumph. Preston Gray, one of the program's earliest participants who had gone on to become a youth counselor, observed how the reunion had transformed the shelter's atmosphere. "It's like everyone suddenly understands what Coach has been trying to teach us," he said. "That our greatest victories often come from helping others find their way." The day ended with an impromptu basketball game, with Scottie and Rowan coaching opposite teams. Quinton Shaw, who had been skeptical of sports-based rehabilitation programs, watched in amazement as residents of all ages and backgrounds played together, encouraging each other, embodying the very principles Rowan had been teaching all along. Have you ever witnessed a moment when past and present converged to create something powerful? When a circle of kindness and mentorship completed itself in unexpected ways? Share your stories of reunion and redemption in the comments below. Sometimes the greatest championships aren't won on professional courts, but in the quiet victories of lives transformed through belief, purpose, and the unwavering support of others who see our potential even when we can't see it ourselves.